here. I won't go through all of these, but if you've been following the rhetoric related to HB2 and some of the things that have been said about the city of Charlotte and other cities in the past, whether it's Asheville or Raleigh or whatever, you'll see that that kind of feeling towards cities from the state government plays out around the country as well. This is from Arizona. We're talking about political subdivisions driving the economy off a cliff. This is a state representative in Missouri talking about what Kansas City and St. Louis does and how that hurts his constituents in the rural areas. And that's sort of the same thing we've been hearing about large cities, especially in North Carolina. I mentioned there was a local minimum wage preemption part of House Bill 2. That, again, is not something that's unique to North Carolina. There's up to 17 of those as of 2015, and 14 more states introduced legislation for that in 2016. I'm pretty sure we were the only one that did it as part of a bathroom bill, but again, these different elements of the legislation are popping up nationwide. And kind of the new twist, or something that we just see mainly in the past 2 years, is starting to punish cities and counties for actually violating these laws. So Texas, for instance, is withholding crime control grant money if you violate a sanctuary cities law that passed there. In Arizona, as of this year, if a citizen complains that a city or county is violating the law, the Attorney General can investigate, and the Attorney General that determines that a city has overstepped its bounds in any way in violating the law, the state will withhold just general revenues that are passed down from the state to the local level as punishment for that city overstepping. And I'll talk about House Bill 100 a little bit later in North Carolina. That did not pass this last year, but it came up, and it's very much along those lines, withholding city and county revenue in instances where they're found to have violated the law. So we're seeing not just rhetoric anymore, but legislation, actual legislation with a punishment component for local governments. So it's something that's coming around the country and is already here. This is the Senate President in Arizona saying, if you knowingly violate a state law, why should you get it passed? Local jurisdictions or subdivisions of the state, and they are violating the law. And I think that was sort of the argument that was used in Arizona for this, making this case for Arizona to withhold general revenues as punishment for what they would consider misbehavior at the local level. What we're trying to do as the league, we think our best chance at success at the local level, at the state level, I should say, in trying to improve this relationship between cities and the state is telling our story about what's happening from an economic development standpoint, what cities and counties do to help foster economic development, bring jobs, the investments that they make that help businesses to succeed in their jurisdictions. So we started a campaign called Here We Grow. We passed out, I have my little pen on, my little pen, I don't know if you can see it, at our annual conference earlier this week, where we have that website set up. I should have it up there. I believe it's herewegrowNC.com, where you can go in, and it's sort of a crowdsourced website where representatives from cities can go in, tell their story about the investments they've made that have helped bring jobs to their community, and hopefully we'll be able to put together kind of a map across the state of all the different things that local jurisdictions have done to help economic development, because that's what cities are all about, that's what counties are all about, and hopefully we should be partners with the state in that effort as well. So that's sort of our effort going forward. If you would think of anything that y'all have done locally or pass this message on back in your governments, that would be great. We'd really love to see as many stories as possible on that website so that we can make this case that we're partners in economic development with legislators and with state officials as well. So I mentioned elections and the economy. I don't have much to say about the elections. I mean, I think you all know, the First Lady and Secretary Clinton here while the conference was going on. That was just in the last couple of days, I think. I mean, I'm not a pundit. I've read that, if Donald Trump doesn't win North Carolina, there's really no path for him to the presidency. I don't know whether that's true or not, but we have very competitive elections at both the presidential, Senate, and gubernatorial level. So I'm sure we're going to keep seeing surrogates and candidates coming through here all the way up through election day. And how some of that turns out will determine a lot of what happens at the General Assembly next year. But I'm sure many of you know that right now we have a Republican governor and we have a House and Senate that both have supermajorities. That is, they have enough votes, if everybody votes along party lines, to override any veto of the governor. There seems to be at least a chance that Democrat Roy Cooper would win the governorship. He's been ahead in some polls. I think that's tightening and getting closer, so I think that's going to be a possible for Election Day. And that there may be enough change in seats in the House of Representatives where Republicans might lose their supermajority. So if you had a situation where the Senate was still controlled by a supermajority of Republicans, the House was controlled by Republicans, but they didn't have enough votes to override any governor's veto, and we had a Democrat in the governor's seat, that would be a very different dynamic than what we've seen over the last probably 6 years, at least in North Carolina. And so, to some extent, what happens in 2017, I'm about to give you this preview, but it could be rendered moot or not by what happens in these elections coming up. A lot of the attention being paid on state races, state legislative races, are in urban areas, and particularly sort of suburban areas, kind of ring areas in Wake and Mecklenburg County, where there's been a lot of new voters just in the past couple of years. You know, to the extent that there's any losses in seats from Republicans, and it happens in those areas, you'd be losing a lot of urban Republican voices and making, you know, I mentioned urban-rural tensions earlier. I think those will still be a part because folks are talking about those seats being lost in the urban level where you still have a majority of legislative seats controlled by representatives of rural areas. So if anything, the election could only exacerbate some of those discussions that we've seen over the last couple of years. But again, this all sort of remains to be seen and what happens at the polls on November 8th. And I don't know, I live in Raleigh, I don't know where y'all are from, but hopefully, well, I don't know hopefully, but many of you are maybe as tired of seeing these commercials as I am, so I'll be very happy when November 9th comes around and we can put those to rest for at least another year or so. I won't say much about the economy other than this is sales tax tracking for North Carolina, for local governments particularly. We had that spike there earlier in the year. This tracks year-over-year growth, so like where this year's distribution of sales taxes was as compared to last year's distribution of sales taxes. We had that spike when the sales tax base expanded a few months ago, and I think we all thought that that base expansion would sort of continue forward for a while. That would sort of be a new normal. And just in the last couple of months, the sales tax distributions have dropped pretty significantly. Now, on a month-to-month basis, some of this can be affected by large refunds that get processed, like at the hospital or at university or somebody's doing construction. So we probably need some more data to figure out whether this is a trend or not. But the last couple months of sales tax data have not been particularly encouraging. So that's just something to keep an eye on and to think about as you think about your local revenue picture and revenue pressures in your jurisdiction. These are state numbers from the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. If you look at year-over-year growth and just total employment in North Carolina, we're right about just a little bit ahead of the national numbers. And if you look back to those pre-recession numbers of 2006, we're just about where the state was before the recession. If you look at it from a wage standpoint, North Carolina is still tracking ahead of where this country is as a whole. But if you look at those pre-recession numbers of about 7% wage and salary growth before the recession, we still have not made it back to those pre-recession levels when it comes to wages and salaries. And so when you hear a lot of discussion about the economy during this election, I think there's, to some extent, there's fodder for both sides to work with there. Jobs are coming back and jobs are about at the same level as they were before the recession, but those wages are still tracking behind where they were before the recession. So the jobs are there, but they're not as high paying jobs as they were pre-2008. And so some of this sluggish growth and the projected growth for the coming years, this moderate 2.5% GDP growth, I think is based on that yes, we're getting some jobs back, but the wages still have not quite made it back to that point. So again, I think that'll be a significant factor for the election and just something to keep an eye on for local governments going forward. So looking forward, 2017 issues. I left my phone up on the podium. I don't know how I'm doing on time. I know the first thing that I brought up here was municipal revenue options. I know that's going to be a big focus for the league. We had our goals conference on Sunday to vote on our top priorities for the coming biennium, and municipal revenue options is going to be one of those. You city folks probably know the only really locally controlled source of revenue for city governments at this point is the property tax. And so when it comes to needing to fund additional services, you're seeing this growth, you're seeing additional population, you want to expand what you're doing in any way. A lot of our local officials in a lot of respects don't have any choice except to raise the property tax when they want to do that. And so we would like to see some sort of diversification of the revenue stream. We're not specific as to what that means, whether it's a city-only sales tax they could implement, whether it's some additional occupancy tax flexibility. Prepared meals taxes are not very prevalent in North Carolina. There's a lot of different ideas about what that could be. We're just interested in working with the legislature to give our members some more options when it comes to raising revenues in North Carolina. To some extent, that could play hand in hand with the sales tax redistribution. My clicker's failing me. Sales tax redistribution that we had a really significant fight over in 2015 at the legislative level. Many of you probably know there was a proposal to try to direct more revenue to rural areas by essentially taking it from some of the urban and tourist areas and redirecting to more rural counties. I won't go into all the weeds of how that was done. It was very complicated. We ended up with a compromise that wasn't supposed to cost anybody any money. But I think as long as we continue talking about urban-rural divide and ways to help some of our rural counties thrive and bring them up to speed, looking at the way sales taxes are distributed in the state is going to be part of that. So I'm afraid this is another fight that we will probably be having in 2017. I mentioned occupancy tax. There may be some opportunities there. There was a local bill filed last year to get some more occupancy tax flexibility in the city of Jacksonville. Maybe that's one way to try to get rural areas some more revenue without necessarily creating sort of winners and losers and taking sales taxes from one place and directing them to another. Thank you. To the extent you all are members of the local government retirement system, this is probably something that you'll want to pay attention to. There's increasing talk about the funding levels of our state and local retirement system. There's kind of been this discussion for a while. There's an assumed rate of return built into the retirement system. And because of the way the stock market has been the past few years, the retirement system has not been hitting its rate of return that it's supposed to get. And so that's caused some legislative attention to the status of the retirement system as a whole. So I think there'll be discussions about the funding levels of our retirement systems, the assumed rate of return. I'm sure, I don't know if anybody said this publicly, but I'm sure there are members in the General Assembly who just philosophically are opposed to the idea of pension plans and would love to see the state and local pension plans look more like a defined contribution system, like a private 401k, than a pension defined benefit plan. So it's possible that if there are discussions about funding of the retirement system, that they could end up there looking at just changing the fundamental nature of the retirement system. We in the counties, I know, are supportive of the way the retirement system works now and believe it's well funded and well managed, but I think this is a discussion we're going to be having in 2017. So certainly something to keep an eye on as local employees. You know, a lot of attention gets focused on the state retirement system, but for the purposes of the investments, everything is commingled. And so if there's a move to change the state system, even if they didn't necessarily want to change the nature of the local retirement system, it would probably get wrapped up in any change that was made because the investments of all these retirement plans are managed together. So anytime you see discussion about changing the state retirement system, just know that that has the potential to affect your retirement system as local employees as well. Police and community, this is primarily a body cam issue. You know, there was body cam legislation last session that I know ourselves and the county commissioners were out there talking about what that means, that footage from body cameras could not be released unless there was an order given by a judge. And I think a lot of people talked about that and what the law said, but it didn't really hit home for folks until there was the tragic incident with the police-involved shooting in the city of Charlotte and a realization about who was allowed and who was not allowed to look at that footage. So there has been some discussion already of going back and reassessing the body camera legislation from 2016 and 2017. So we may open up that discussion again. We've had forums with the Legislative Black Caucus and the Police Chiefs Association and doing a lot of discussion of this issue. Maybe from your perspective, I know there are still questions about storage of these records and what needs to be kept and where and how is that going to be funded. I don't know that anybody has good answers to these questions, but if any of you have any thoughts or have any input from the local level on anything related to body cameras from a storage perspective or otherwise, I would love to hear it, because it does seem at this point that we'll probably be talking about that again in 2017. Budget transparency, I know, is a question that I've gotten at this conference before. In 2015, there was this provision put into the budget that said that all local governments were going to have to track their spending down to a vendor level and update it every month on their website and on the state website. I think it was anybody who works in this area in local government could read that and knew pretty quickly that it was not legislation that was really feasible to be achieved with any level of funding, much less the negligible funding that was actually passed as part of the budget. So the state has taken the lead on budget transparency and is tracking local spending through the existing resources that it has, and is trying to, I think, at least meet the intent of the law, even if it's not the actual letter of the law. I had heard some talk before the 2016 session that they were going to try to reassess that and make the actual statutory language something that would be realistic for everybody to work with. There were no changes to that in 2016. I don't know if anybody will be looking at that in 2017, but from that perspective, I think it's mainly just status quo, and the state has advised local governments that they will be taking the responsibility for fulfilling this portion of the budget. So there shouldn't be anything additional that you need to do on that front going forward. Municipal elections. I'll just say there was a study passed last year. A lot of times when we pass a study at the General Assembly, it's like, hey, we're going to go look at this issue and then come up with some recommendations for what this study related to this issue is going to come up with. In this instance, they passed a study kind of already knowing the result. They said, we want all municipal elections to be held in even years by 2020, and the study is just going to be determined how to get to that point. So far, there has been no committee that's met. Nobody's actually been studying this. I don't know if they'll try to do that, in the 2 months between the election and the General Assembly started, but at least as the law stands now, all municipal elections will be held in even years as of 2020. So what that means for your local commissioners, councilpersons, aldermen, I don't know, but there may be a change in elections coming. We just don't know quite how yet. Sanctuary cities, this might be the last issue I mentioned in any sort of detail. This was what I referenced earlier. There's this idea that cities in North Carolina are serving as sanctuary cities. Depending on how you define that, I don't know that that's actually the case, that any cities are not enforcing immigration law the way that they should be, but there's at least this feeling among the General Assembly that that's the case. And so there was this proposal last year that the Attorney General could investigate any complaints of the city not violating the sanctuary city law, and if the Attorney General were to find that a city was violating the law, they could withhold in the case of cities, it would be Powell bill money, the money that you get for transportation. In the case of counties, it would be school capital funding. We had concerns about how sanctuary cities were defined. We also had concerns about the fact that this would have basically given carte blanche to the Attorney General, and they would have been solely responsible for the investigation and the finding, and there would be no appeals process and not even necessarily an opportunity to participate in the investigation. So again, this is not unique to North Carolina. We're seeing it all around the country. It did not pass, but it wouldn't be surprising if it came up again in some form or another in 2017. I had a few other issues in here about transportation, county tier system, land use and regulatory reforms, which are not necessarily my issue. We have some very good land use attorneys on staff who deal with all that. I'm happy to stick around for a little while and answer any questions you have. The only other thing I wanted to mention, which has been sort of a major issue for us for the last month or two, is water sewer impact fees. A lot of city utilities and some county utilities around the state are charging, some of them call it impact fees, some of them call them system development fees, capacity development fees. It's new fees that are charged to new development to help them pay for additional capacity or additional demand placed on a utility system when a new development comes online. There was a Supreme Court case involving the town of Carthage. The league insures the town of Carthage, so we funded their defense in this case, that was alleging that the town of Carthage did not have the authority to levy impact fees of any sort. The town of Carthage prevailed at the trial court level. And I always say this, I'm not a lawyer, so I may screw up the nomenclature. I think I have this all right at this point, but don't hold me to it if there's any attorneys in the room. The town of Carthage prevailed at the trial court level and at the appeals court level, but the Supreme Court ruled against the town of Carthage and in favor of this developer that cities do not have the authority to levy impact fees, at least as they define them, as being charged before a development comes online or before for any services that are not being provided at the time by the utility. There's a small difference in wording in statutes. The county and city statutes say that fees must be charged for services furnished. For municipal and county utility districts, there's a language that says services furnished or to be furnished. And the Supreme Court determined that those two words, to be furnished, made the difference as to whether your utility was allowed to charge impact fees or not. So the impact of this, I haven't found a way to talk about impact fees without saying the impact of impact fees, but the effect of this is that, for one, cities at this point and counties are not allowed to charge impact fees going forward. You know, I've heard from some jurisdictions that if they were going to make up the revenue from what they currently are charging in impact fees, they could be raising water and sewer rates 25, 30, 35% locally to help make up for this revenue. So there's that impact of it going forward. What are they going to do about revenue and funding the utility system in the future? The Supreme Court also remanded to the appeals court level the issue of the statute of limitations, because these developers have asked that impact fees that were charged previously, the city or county reimburse them for what they paid before. So there are arguments at the appeals courts level now. I don't think there's been any hearings, but that's where the case is right now. There's an argument, I understand, for 1 year of repayment, for 3 years of repayment, and for 10 years of repayment. And the developers are obviously asking for 10 years of repayment. That's what they believe is appropriate. So cities may not have the ability to charge these fees going forward. They also may have to repay up to 10 years worth of impact fees, which if you're in a high growth area and it's determined that your fee falls under this statute as being illegal, I know we heard from one utility on the coast that said they have a $2 million utility budget, that their repayment over the course of 10 years would probably be $1.5 million, so 3/4 of the utility's entire budget for the year. So this is just something to know. Like I said, we funded the defense, have been working on amicus briefs, but you know, this will be a significant issue for us at the legislature, trying to make sure that cities can fund their utilities going forward without raising utility rates significantly on their customers, and trying to protect them from what they have to repay to these developers, because that could run into the, easily run into the millions of dollars, maybe tens of millions of dollars for some utilities, and what impact that would have on your local budgets and your local utility rates. So I know that's going to be something significant for us in 2017, maybe the top issue that we'll be working on going forward. I always like to get in a plug in. Our communication staff has started a podcast, has been pretty successful. If you all have any interest, you all are podcast listeners and want to search out Municipal Equation, please do, because I think it's interesting stuff that they're doing there. I think that's my last plug. I don't have any events to talk about. Our annual conference is earlier this week, so we're happy to be past that. I'm happy to take any questions. I think I'm about at my time. If there are any questions, again, I'm happy to hang around afterward as well if you want to just ask me anything in the individually. But I do think I'm at my time, but I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thank you all for being here this morning, and look forward to talking with you more. Thank you.